October the 25th, 1854. 670 British cavalrymen are ordered to charge into a valley surrounded by enemy cannons on 3 sides. They know it is a blunder. They know they will likely die. A French marshal watching declares, "It is magnificent, but it is not war. It is madness." This was the charge of the Light Brigade, one of the most infamous disasters in military history. But the disaster is not the real story. The real story is about the men. It is about an impossible level of courage that terrified the enemy who witnessed it. By the end of this video, you will understand why these soldiers, knowing they were charging to certain death, never hesitated for a single second. You will understand how their ultimate sacrifice forged a national legend of grit and honor that echoes to this day. The story begins not on the battlefield, but in the drawing rooms of London. The British Army of the 19th century was led by an aristocracy that bought its power. Officers purchased their commissions. Promotion was based on wealth and social standing, not skill or experience. At the top of this dysfunctional pyramid in the Crimean War was Lord Raglan, the commander-in-chief. He was 65 years old and had spent most of his 50-year career behind a desk. He had never commanded a battalion in the field. His cavalry commander was George Bingham, the Earl of Lucan, and leading the elite Light Brigade under Lucan was James Brudenell, the Earl of Cardigan. Lucan and Cardigan were brothers-in-law, and they despised each other with a passion that bordered on insanity. They were barely on speaking terms. One officer wrote home that Cardigan has as much brains as my boot, and was only equalled in want of intellect by his relation the Earl of Lucan. This was the chain of command. A vain and inexperienced commander-in-chief, and 2 feuding subordinates who loathed one another. This toxic rivalry, this aristocratic incompetence, was about to be put to the ultimate test on the fields of Balaclava. The stakes were nothing less than the fate of the British war effort in the Crimea. The port of Sevastopol was the prize, and the British supply lines at Balaclava had to be defended at all costs. On that fateful morning, the Russian army launched a massive assault. They overran a series of defensive positions, known as redoubts, capturing British naval guns. The situation was critical. The Russian cavalry, thousands strong, advanced. They were met first by the 93rd Highlanders, who formed what a journalist called a thin red streak tipped with a line of steel. The Highlanders stood their ground and fired with devastating accuracy, repelling the Russian charge. Then came the turn of the Heavy Brigade. In a stunning display of power, they charged uphill and smashed into the superior Russian force, sending them reeling back in chaos. The British were winning. The day could be saved. From his high command post, Lord Raglan saw the Russians beginning to drag away the captured British guns. For a commander of his era, losing artillery was the ultimate humiliation. He had to get them back. He dictated a hurried, fatally ambiguous order. Lord Raglan wishes the cavalry to advance rapidly to the front, follow the enemy, and try to prevent the enemy carrying away the guns. He gave the order to his aide, Captain Lewis Nolan. Nolan was a brilliant and passionate cavalry officer, but he was also impetuous and held a deep contempt for both Lucan and Cardigan, who he saw as timid and incompetent. He galloped down to the valley to deliver the order to Lord Lucan. From Lucan's position, the situation was completely different. He could not see the guns being removed. The only guns visible to him were the main Russian artillery battery, a mile down the valley, heavily fortified with cannons on the heights on both sides. He read the order with confusion. "Attack, sir," he asked Nolan. "Attack what? What guns?" What happened next is disputed, but Lucan claimed that Captain Nolan, in a fit of frustration, gestured vaguely with his arm, not towards the captured guns, but down the entire length of the valley. "There, my lord, is your enemy. There are your guns." Lucan was stunned. The order was insane, but it was a direct command, delivered with urgency. He rode over to his hated brother-in-law, Lord Cardigan. Cardigan listened to the order and was equally aghast. He pointed out the obvious. "Allow me to point out to you that there is a battery in front, a battery on each flank, and the ground is covered with Russian riflemen." It was a death trap. Lucan could only reply, "I cannot help that. It is Lord Raglan's positive order that the Light Brigade is to attack the enemy." Cardigan saluted. He turned to his men. He was heard to mutter, "Here goes the last of the Brudenels." The order was given. The trumpeter sounded the advance, and the 670 men of the Light Brigade, the 4th Light Dragoons, the 8th and 11th Hussars, the 13th Light Dragoons, and the 17th Lancers began to move forward. They advanced in 2 perfect lines, glittering in the morning sun. A correspondent for the London Times, William Howard Russell, watched in disbelief. "We could hardly believe the evidence of our senses. Surely that handful of men were not going to charge an army in position." At a distance of 1,200 yards, the entire line of the enemy erupted. From 30 iron mouths, a flood of smoke and flame belched forth. The valley floor was torn apart by cannonballs. Gaps instantly appeared in the British ranks. Men and horses were blown to pieces. Steeds flew riderless across the plain. Yet they did not stop. They did not slow down. They quickened their pace. The first man to fall was Captain Nolan, the man who delivered the order, killed by a shell splinter in the opening moments. For over a mile, the Light Brigade rode through this storm of iron. A survivor, Sergeant William Butler, described the carnage. He saw comrades mercilessly cut down, blood-splattered bodies, and smoke filling the air like a volcanic eruption. But through it all, they rode on, straight towards the guns. Their discipline was absolute, their courage unbreakable. They smashed into the Russian battery at the end of the valley with the force of a thunderbolt. They cut down the gunners as they stood at their posts. A Russian officer wrote of their brave despair, noting that not one of them, wounded or not, laid down his arms. They had done the impossible. They had reached the guns. But they were surrounded, hopelessly outnumbered, and without support. They fought their way back through the valley of death, shattered and bleeding, but their honor intact. Of the roughly 670 men who made the charge, about 110 were killed and 160 were wounded. 475 horses were lost. The Light Brigade, as a fighting force, had been annihilated. The charge of the Light Brigade was an immediate and catastrophic failure. It was the direct result of a vague order, amplified by personal animosity and aristocratic arrogance. But in the weeks and months that followed, something remarkable happened. The story of the blunder faded, and the story of the men rose to take its place. The news, reported by war correspondents, electrified the British public. This was not a story of failure. It was a story of superhuman bravery. The poet Alfred, Lord Tennyson, immortalized their sacrifice in his famous poem, cementing their legend. The charge became a symbol, not of incompetence, but of the incredible, almost terrifying sense of duty and discipline of the British soldier. It demonstrated to the world that even when led by fools, the British fighting man possessed a core of steel. This event resonates in Britain's identity even today. It speaks to a national character of grit, of doing one's duty no matter the cost, of facing overwhelming odds without flinching. The legacy of the charge of the Light Brigade is not found in the captured guns or the failed objectives. It is found in the unshakable spirit of the 600 who charged. The ultimate takeaway is this: true glory is not always measured in victory. Sometimes it is forged in the fires of a noble sacrifice, a moment of courage so pure that it becomes immortal. If you believe that history holds the power to inspire, then make sure to like this video, subscribe to Indomitable History, and hit that notification bell. But now I want to know what you think. Was the charge of the Light Brigade the ultimate display of a soldier's honor, or was it a pointless tragedy? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.